Welcome to the Health Industry Playbook for Securing AI Third Parties. Inside the Health Sector Coordinating Council, Health Industry Third-Party AI Risk and Supply Chain Transparency Guide. And I am pleased to be joined by Samantha Jacks of McLaren. Samantha, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ed. We're super excited to talk about this today. This document has just come out and it's literally hot off the presses.
It is. Last week is when it first was published. After we spent what feels like a couple of years. Is that possible? Did we spend No, it can't be a
It
couple
was
of
not
years.
years, but I swear in AI time, a couple of months equals a couple of years. So you're
Yeah,
right.
it's like the new time spectrum, like dog years, right? But it's AI years now, right? So
Yep, the time warp. We're going
I
through the
lo-
time warp.
I love it. I love it. Well, we have a lot to cover today, so let's just get right into it. Again, I'm Ed Gaudet. I'm the CEO and founder of Sensinet, and I'm here with Dr. Samantha Jacks, the Vice President of Clinical Engineering at McLaren Health. And we are going to talk today about third-party and supply chain transparency in an AI setting. But before we do, I want to bring attention to a bunch of other webinars we're doing as part of this series. So this is one of seven. Yesterday, we talked about building the AI governance standard for healthcare, which got a lot of really great questions from folks. Next week, we will go into the cover topics of systemic risk and resiliency in a complex, multi-layered health ecosystem with Eric Decker. We're going to be talking about what the board needs to know about AI risk. And then we are going to change and focus on the rural and community health systems and how they can do more with less. We have three great participants in that webinar that will help us really unpack what's needed for the rural and community health systems. And then the last two are going to be a little more technical in nature. So we're going to dive into the AI kill chain and new threats in the attack surface of AI with some interesting industry experts. Okay, so like I said earlier, a lot to unpack. I think as we began this journey and really pulling together this guide, it became really clear that the weak link, if you will, in AI adoption was third parties. More and more of AI adoption was coming through the third party channel than ever before. So it included not just cybersecurity challenges that we've been used to over the last couple of decades or so, but we were seeing it impact every single system, whether it be operational or clinical. It was coming in the front door through new offerings. It was coming in the back door, the side window, the attic, the floorboards through existing third-party systems, whether they be software, hardware, device, or otherwise. And so it really makes this problem much more difficult, I think, than those types of new threats that we've had to deal with in the past. And not to mention, there's incredible pressure from the business and from the clinical side of the health system to push adoption of AI applications and systems. So obviously, we can drive better outcomes for patients.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think a lot of us understood how much AI had infiltrated our organizations, right, until we started getting our arms around it, right? From a medical device perspective, right, AI's been in medical devices and been approved by the FDA for decades now, right? And when I tell people that, they scratch their head, right? Like we've called it different things. Maybe we called it machine learning, maybe we called it something, slightly different, but fundamentally, it's been around forever. And so once we started getting our arms around it, we didn't understand how it had already entrenched itself in our organizations, and now we had to continue to drive, right, all the new AI that's coming into in your words, coming in the windows and in the attic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also it's not just the technical aspects, it's also the soft aspects of contracting. So really understanding the impact from a legal and a contractual workflow perspective and making sure that we are, pulling in the right language into our business associate agreements. And quite frankly, those haven't been updated. There's no policies we can pull off the shelf to make that happen.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think the other area that really gets missed, especially by teams that are very focused on cybersecurity, is the training aspect, right?
Mm.
Our end users don't have a great understanding, right? Those of us technical people have been living and breathing this for a while. And so we have a great understanding of what the risks are, what the benefits are, and what we need to do to protect ourselves. End users don't have that type of training. And we have to make sure that, right, those actually using the tools that we're implementing can keep the environment safe as much as we are as cybersecurity professionals do.
Yeah, when we looked at all those challenges, it became really clear we needed some type of vehicle, some type of guide to help organizations navigate the landscape, the ever changing and rapidly changing landscape of AI adoption. And what I really love about this task group in particular, although we've had the pleasure of working on across a couple of these over the last couple months, is that we're able to draw upon some existing, a priori state of art work that's been published, like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, like HICCUP, like the HICSCRIM, the Supply Chain Risk Management Guide, and then really adapt them to include those AI specific aspects of policy or procedure or organizational structure. Oftentimes when these technologies get introduced, we sort of slipstream them into our existing processes. But with AI, we had to take a step back and think about if we're going to quickly adopt this, we need much more of a cross-functional approach. We need to really start with the committee, the adoption committee, and we have to staff it with folks not only within cybersecurity, but also in the business on the clinical side, to have that balanced aspect. We also needed some, advocacy for patients, which again, typically from a risk management perspective, we do think about those things, but not, not directly in the process of adoption. And I thought that was a really interesting, perspective. And so applying those critical aspects of third-party adoption with the new technology across all these different workflows and systems, and doing it in a way that was scalable, so the guide could actually, could work in a large setting, but also in a rural setting, and scale up accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's probably to me the most important, right? We have a lot of supply chain processes in place in healthcare systems today. We can't just blow them up and start again just because this new technology's come along. And so I think this tool did a really nice job of layering in the additional complexity that needed to be addressed while not completely disrupting the entire supply chain process that most organizations use.
Yeah, so let's dig right into it. So, the first thing was I remember we wrestled with the scope. Is this going to be how big? Can we make this? How many systems should we cover? Should we cover everything? Obviously, we're going to include clinical systems, but should we cover the operational and administrative systems as well? All the different embedded infrastructure that exist as well, and then what things were we not going to include, which was equally as and probably more difficult, right? Saying no to certain things like, you know, it, we're going to sort of reference these things, but we're not going to go too deep on those internally developed AI solutions or the personal productivity solutions that one may implement. Okay. And then we took a look at, you know, how, how do we think about this across the life cycle? And I think this is a really big aha for the working group, for the task group, taking a life cycle approach to the problem and really looking at it from cradle to grave and a couple of points in between, as you think about adopting technology, but specifically third-party AI-based technology. And so the initial phase talks more about the need to actually to adopt AI versus a traditional tool or technology, all the way through to the contract negotiations, the updates to the BAA. We talked about all of the training and implementation and integration that has to occur once the system is in place, and then once it is in place, how often are we going to monitor it? And what are we looking for in terms of outcomes in performance? And then what happens if we do have an incident? Making sure that we can recover, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So having those response vehicles and recovery vehicles, the resiliency, if you will, in place and tested on a regular basis was so critical to making sure that we took a look at the entire life cycle. And then lastly, and I think this is probably more important now with AI, it's that transitioning the end of life of that technology or tool. And I assume, based on, we're still early days in the adoption process overall, but we're going to see a lot more end of life and a lot more accelerated transitions than I think we would have seen in traditional types of tools and technology.
No, I agree 100%. And these, life cycle focus type phases really resonate with a lot of departments across healthcare, right? Whether you're in supply chain, whether you're in IT, right? A lot of organizations have started a really life cycle focused type of acquisition process. And so this is really where I think this document helps organizations define exactly where, right, pieces and parts of AI need to be looked at in different ways, while not, again, disrupting their normal processes that they're used to going through.
Exactly. And we're gonna echo and amplify this point throughout each one of the phases, but each phase is backed with a set of tools in at the end of the document in the appendix, which are going to be really handy for folks that are beginning their journey, beginning to implement a program such as this to deal or extend, maybe create something new or extend their existing program to embrace AI adoption securely and responsibly.
Yeah, I think the one thing I will say is this tool, right, that we've put out, regardless of where you are as a health system, can be adapted to you, right? If you already take a life cycle approach, this is easily implemented within your current life cycle approach. If you've not implemented a life cycle approach, it's easily adaptable. This document meets you where you are, I think, as a healthcare organization, and that to me was very important, right? Putting out guidance like this. So we're going to jump in and get to some of the details, right, related to some of these phases. And so, those of us that have been in technology for a long time understand that technology is not the solution to every problem. And so phase zero for us was actually a very important phase because AI is not the answer to everything, right? Regardless of how many people are knocking on your door saying we need to implement this cool whiz bang solution that does X, Y, and Z. The step that you need to take to actually justify what you're implementing, and then does that implementation actually need to include AI is a very important step, right? Solving problems in healthcare is incredibly complex, right? We all know that we live in incredibly complicated times, but whether or not you need to implement your solution with AI is a question that needs to be asked very early, right? And that decision needs to be made by a very cross-functional team. And so this document gives you a lot of ways to go ahead and identify that kind of use case justification to help you make that decision, right? There's a classification that it proposes, right? Is it a low risk? Is it a medium risk? We really focus on the high and critical risks, right? Those risks are ones that, right, make autonomous decisions, right? We have to be real careful when there's autonomous decision making, especially if it impacts any patient life, patient safety type of impacts. If the failure of the AI causes any kind of harm, or right, if there's a massive financial impact, right? If the system impacts financials, all of those impacts can take into account, right, some kind of risk related to that. And so in this stage, we also need to look at, right, what kind of data, right, the solution is looking at. So from a risk perspective, it's not only what the output's going to touch, but also what your inputs need to look like, right? Am I inputting PHI? Am I inputting PII? Or am I just inputting, right, basic admin type data that's very low risk? All of that type of assessment really gets you to a risk score, right, related to, right, that use case justification. And that helps your organization understand what they're kind of taking on by implementing this kind of AI tool. There is an appendix for this. Like Ed said, every one of these phases has an appendix. The appendix has a very clear use case justification, a very nice template, as well as some risk definitions that you guys can adopt. You can adapt for yourself as well. so that you can make some really smart decisions, right, on whether or not you are going to implement this AI-based tool.
Yeah, and these phases, again, what I love about the HSCC is these phases were built based on the collective wisdom and experience of membership. And so we spent a lot of time working through not only the scope but also the phases and getting feedback from folks. What are you doing right now? What's working? What's not working? And this phase in particular came out always on top. It's like we have to hold ourselves accountable to going through this process of outlining and justifying the use case and really understanding the use case. Because if we don't understand the use case, there's so many things we're not going to get right initially. We won't get the level of risk or impact it could have on our organization. So we may not put the level of due diligence into the assessment of that application. And so I love starting here, obviously. And I think, again, folks that are beginning their journey, will have a really sound foundation to start from.
I agree. All right, so all of us now know phase one. We all do vendor evaluations. I think the really interesting section around vendor evaluations that this guide gives you is the truly AI specific questions, right, that you need to ask. Right, and I've got Ed here, right, with a beautiful Sensinet program and tool, right, that does a whole lot of questionnaires for all kinds of people, I'm sure, even on this webinar today. Standard questions don't meet the requirements from an AI perspective, right? You cannot understand the risk by answering and asking the standard questions in a normal GRC type of assessment. There are incredible wealth of knowledge that you need to get from your vendors. Again, depending on the risk, depending on how critical the vendor is, how critical the tool is. But the document covers 10 different domains. Again, depending on how deep you need to go into the assessment of the product, looking at everything from right bias and quality and data lineage and right security controls and how are we going to deal with downtimes and right how do we deal with upgrades and all of this stuff that is incredibly important in the AI world that we normally don't ask about, right? For a normal tool or under a normal type of security questionnaire. So again, all risk-based, right? You shouldn't be asking 100 extra questions for every AI tool you bring in, right? But those critical, those high-risk types of tools that you are bringing in, you need to truly understand what you're getting into and uncover all of those risks that your organization is taking on. And so, the assessments that are provided, there's, again, a whole bunch of additional questions that are added in the appendices for you guys to adopt. You can pick and choose. They are not, kind of required. It's really based on whatever tool you're looking at, whatever risk you're trying to take on as an organization.
And if you don't have a tool like Sensinet, remember to curate these questions actively, frequently, because they're going to change, and the things that we want to look at are going to change over time as we learn more about the AI systems that we are assessing, and we are building risk management programs against. Okay, contracts. Oh,
Now let's assume you've managed to make it through assessment, right? You've now understood exactly what you're getting yourselves into, and you're ready to go to contract negotiation, right? This is where a lot of security teams don't have a depth of knowledge, right? Security people have not gone to law school, right? It doesn't work like that, right? We're too busy doing day jobs. This is really where we're bringing in those other teams within our organization to really understand how to protect the overall organization. So whether it's the actual user agreement, right? Whether it's the business associate agreement, terms and conditions based on your GRC assessment, based on your risk assessment, need to be incorporated into your contracts. And this document really gives you a good place to start, right? You don't need to rewrite legal terms. You don't need to rewrite clauses. There's all kinds of things, though, that it prompts you to start thinking about to add to your contracts, right? So, number one, right, in my mind, right, especially when we're talking about AI, is data, right? Am I going to allow my data to be trained, right, in the AI? What kind of data is it? Is it PHI? Is it PII? Right? At the end of life, when we get out of this contract, or when the tool is at end of life, am I going to be able to get my data out? Right? All of those data type questions are really, really complicated, and you really want to talk those through with your compliance teams to understand what your organization's comfortable with from a risk perspective. There's
That's right.
also
And
all kinds of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's also all kinds of prompts to think about related to transparency, right? And upstream and downstream impacts. AI is complicated in a very different way than normal supply chain risks, right? A lot of companies that sell us AI tools don't actually build those tools, right? And so we have now fourth parties and fifth parties and sixth parties, and getting transparency into them becomes very, very complicated. And so you can be at risk related to some of your contract terms if you don't think about how to craft those terms for the organization you're contracting with, right, related to those third, fourth, and fifth parties. So again, this document does a great job trying to give you ideas as well as actual terms to add to your contract negotiations, whether it be right your regular contract or your business associate agreement.
Just a quick disclaimer, neither Samantha nor I are lawyers, so uh, this is not legal advice. You do want to check with your legal team when you do implement this.
For sure, for sure. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to be a rock star when you go to your legal team with terms to start with, right?
No
And they don't
question.
have to make them up on their own. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
be the superstar. Um, the next phase to me is the one that we, as especially in hospitals, get pushed to do quickly, but should not be done quickly at all, right? Right, think yourself as, and I'm going to make it up. You're a physician who's brought this tool to your organization. You've already waited so long because we've had to go through risk assessments, we've had to go through contracting, and I still don't have my tool implemented, right? So now you're pushing and pushing and pushing to get your tool implemented, right? But from a security perspective, from an IT perspective, from an implementation perspective, this is where we have the most risk, right? If you don't link all of the risk you've identified in your GRC, if you don't link all of those contract terms into how you actually implement the solution into your organization, right, you can miss a ton of stuff and open yourself up to risks you haven't even identified yet. And so a lot of organizations stumble at the implementation step, right? Mainly because they're getting a lot of pressure to move very quickly, right? They want to go ahead and be at the leading edge, the bleeding edge, right? They want to go ahead and have all of this ROI, right? That they want to start accumulating without truly understanding that moving slow, going slow to go fast is actually what they need to do. So we really give you in the document a lot of ways to think about implementation in a very standard strategic way so that you can continue to mitigate risk as you implement, right? And this is everything from threat modeling, right? How do we make sure we're thinking about all the threats and mitigating all the threats? How do we test, right? A lot of us love to throw things in production and just hope and pray that it's going to work the way it is. With AI, we don't necessarily want to throw anything into production without a sandbox environment, right? We really want to make sure that the clinical validation is done, right? That the security validations are done, everything that needs to happen to ensure the quality and safety of that product before it gets released happens so that you're ensuring the quality and safety, right, of your production environment. I will say the one thing that a lot of people skip is the training. And I talked a little bit about it before, right? A lot of us just assume our end users have this lovely knowledge about training. But I'm going to tell you, once we get into details, a lot of them don't understand bias. A lot of them don't understand, right, why we need to clinically validate, right, or what drift even looks like, or what they should be looking for, or even basics for your organization, right? How to go ahead and escalate something that doesn't look right, right? If they want to go ahead and tell IT that the output from whatever it is does not fall within parameters, and maybe there's something wrong with the AI that needs to be escalated. The training piece to me is a piece that a lot of organizations can take from this document and really implement and manage risk all the way down to the user level, right, in their organization.
Yeah, and also recognize two things. There could be a gap between when you do the first couple of phases to the implementation, the actual go live of implementation. It could be three to 6 months out before you've done all of the steps here, the threat modeling all the way through the full phase rollout. So keep that in mind, and that system could be taking a bunch of new updates in the process. So you want to make sure that either if you are taking those updates, that you do have sort of a continual approach to monitoring and assessing risk as you are taking these new updates. The second thing I'll say is that the LLM is very different than an agent. So if you are deploying LLMs and agents, you have a couple of different considerations to look at. The LLM may look and assess as rock solid, very low risk, whereas the agent infrastructure may have high risk due to things like identity and access management. And so you really have to take of those two scenarios almost independent of one another, especially as you're in this implementation phase.
All
Okay.
right, and so next is ongoing monitoring, and Ed already kind of alluded to it, but updates and patches and changes to the models, I am going to highlight are much more frequent than normal life cycles, right? Whatever technology you're used to, right? Regular IT technology or medical device technology even goes at a much slower pace, right? The pace of change in AI is so fast that we had to call out a separate phase for ongoing monitoring, right? And a lot of us, right, think, oh, well, we'll do an update once a year, we'll figure it out, right? It's not that big of a deal because we're used to that typical IT type of timeline. That is not the AI timeline. And so thinking about how you're going to actively monitor and actively deal with vendor updates, and what happens if models degrade or if models change, right? Or if your agents do something they're not supposed to do. That monitoring is actually one of the most important pieces of your ongoing risk assessment that you're doing within your organization, right? If you think you're going to implement AI and just do a paper annual assessment of your tool, right, you are sorely mistaken, right? AI risks continue to change and adapt over their life. And so you need to figure out a way to understand exactly what you're going to monitor, when you're going to monitor it, how you're going to monitor it, and who's going to actually do the monitoring, right? And I'm going to go back to the training, right? Those of us sitting in security are not going to see every answer that comes out of the tool. And so you're going to have to figure out how to rely on some of those end users for some of this. Some of it we're going to be able to monitor in security operations, right? What kind of injection prompts are coming, right? Are we having some kind of injection prompt issue? But security is not going to be able to really look at model drift, right? How are we going to measure model drift? Those questions need to be answered, and you need to put a plan in place on how you're going to continually monitor that AI. The other thing I'm going to tell you that's going to be incredibly difficult is update management, right? And Ed already alluded to it, right? Updates come out so frequently. Understanding what's in them, understanding how, right, how your workflows are impacted, understanding how you're going to roll them out, how you're going to test them, is a whole project in and of itself. And I hate to say, hospitals are not nimble when it comes to doing this. And so if you're getting an update every 3 months and it takes you 3 months to go through the testing process, right, you have a problem. You're going to constantly be in this phase of testing the new whatever it is to roll it out. You have to really think about how you're going to change your processes to adapt to update management at a much more quick pace, to again ensure that you're not introducing more risk or the mitigations that you've put in place stay as your updates continue to come out.
Yeah, not to mention if you're dealing with multiple systems that are dealing with multiple LLMs and agent infrastructures, right? So you sort of have this exponential challenge of it's not like Microsoft is the platform and you have one platform. You may have multiple platforms you have to deal with, and you may have um, AI applications that have been sanctioned on personal devices that
Oh,
also that also increases the complexity of this that threat matrix, if you will. So there's a lot to unpack. And
well, and it goes back to the risk again, right? You
mm,
really need to be focused on, right, your high risk things, but I would not take your eye off of those low risk items as well, because
all right.
updates may push your lower risk items into a higher risk class, right?
Hmm.
Especially as Ed said, as it starts interacting with one another, right? You may get some unintended consequences that you don't know, right, what's actually happening in your environment.
Mm. I think we saw 10 updates over the last week across the AI systems that we manage at Sensinet, and and I'm probably off too. It's probably a little more than that, so, which is incredible. Imagine having to monitor that, or you're getting ready to implement, and then someone says, "We actually took 5 updates last week. We need to run it through the we have to reassess this."
It's it's complicated, right? All of us have varying degrees of expertise in this stuff. And so finding the right team to go ahead and ensure that your monitoring is happening is incredibly important.
All right,
All
let's go
right,
to
so
the
then
next
there's
phase.
yeah, and then there's incident response, right? So we
Mm,
all we all thought, hey, maybe we'd be able to skip this step, right? Magically, we'd never have to deal with incident response. But everyone says, and Ed is right. It's not if, it's when. And so fundamentally, in my mind, right, preparation leads to great outcomes. And so if you prepare with your AI vendors on how to deal with incidents, you're going to be much better off, right, than trying to figure it out as you're working your way through it. So the document does a really good job of walking through all the things you need to think about during incident response so that you can have these conversations with your vendors, not only during, right, the GRC portion, you can ask questions about it, but during contracting, right, what are my SLAs, right, what am I going to hold my vendors accountable to? But all through this phase as well, right? We should be doing tabletops with our vendors. We should be
hmm
sitting down and going through exactly what would happen in an event something occurs so that both sides of the table can understand exactly what our responses look like so that expectations can be met, right? Joint responses are becoming more and more popular on the health side because organizations need to understand what's going on over the fence. And organizations obviously that build AI need to understand how operations are actually going to be impacted by it. And so I really, really recommend, right, some joint exercises. And then, right, outputs of those joint exercises are not just, right, some nice after action report. We recommend a very, very stringent CAPA, which is a corrective and preventative action plan, to really get to a remediation, right? Organizations that take a much more preventative type of approach to incident response are able then to just implement these playbooks, right, that get built over time. It can actually respond and react much quicker and have less impacts, right, during the downtimes that are going to happen eventually.
Yeah, this phase in particular really highlights the importance of a shared responsibility model. You've got to have it with your third-party vendors that are deploying AI and AI infrastructure in your organization, or that your organization is assessing or accessing to deliver patient care. And a really good time to do that, and I'll just amplify it, is at the contract phase, right? So get it. That's what contracts are there to keep everyone honest when when we do have incidents. So better to get that upfront in writing in the contract, what the third party will do when there is an incident, what the SLA of response is. They actually agree to joining you in those tabletop exercises as well. Better to do it then than during the incident itself.
I agree, and I think it can't be underscored enough, right? I think a lot of us are really worried about what's coming from an incident response perspective, especially right with Mythos and all the stuff that's out there from AI today. Preparation is really what we need to start doing, and so right, phase five is one of my favorite phases, to be honest with you. But phase six, right? A lot of us never like to think about what happens at the end of the contract.
Mhm.
But I think this is one area where we really need to have a plan, right? And again, it goes back to the contract. If you're implementing an AI, right, and AIs change constantly, we know that models can be sunset whenever they want, right? And so, in a contractual type of agreement, you can have conversations about how much notice do they need to give you, right, prior to sunsetting a model. What's going to happen when that model gets sunsetted, right? Are they moving data to the new model automatically? Will they allow you access to the new model early so that you can transition? What does that transition look like? None of these questions are questions you should be asking when they hand you the notice that your model is going to be
Right.
sunset. Like that, this is not the time to start asking questions about, well, what do I do now? Right?
Yeah, that's
Just like
right.
incident management, you should have a plan for end of life or transitioning away from your vendor when you sit down to write your contract. all software is going to be end of life at some point, right? And I know a lot of us don't like to think about it. A lot of us don't want to deal with it. But fundamentally, there are a ton of third-party dependencies that are out there. We've already talked about it, right?
Hmm.
Fourth parties, fifth parties, sixth parties impact our vendors in a lot of ways. And so sometimes our vendors can't even predict when end of life is going to come from something that happens completely downstream from them. All we can do is try and protect ourselves and try and plan for it. And so understanding exactly how data extraction is going to happen, understanding are they going to give your data back to you? Are they going to destroy your data? What does that look like? How are they going to guarantee that your data is destroyed, especially for those of you that are HIPAA providers, right? And have to have that attestation that they don't have any more of your HIPAA data. What kind of backups are going to happen? All of that stuff needs to be planned very early on, and all of it needs to be in your contract. The contingency planning that goes in up front will save you a lot of pain and a lot of heartache at the back end.
All right.
All right, so we keep talking about these lovely appendices, right? Like the magical appendices that are in this document. For those organizations that have a great process, that are really in tune with their supply chains, that right already have great partnerships out in legal and compliance, it is easy enough for you to then just flip to the appendices and actually just use the tools that are out there. So there are 10 of them. We've already talked about the AI use case justification one, right? Whether or not you actually even need to implement AI, that's out there. For those organizations that haven't necessarily started down the path or have only started down the path a little bit and they need some help with governance and what governance looks like, there is a template for a policy, a governance policy. And it talks about every aspect of governance related to AI, a specific AI group that goes ahead and monitors and oversees all AI within your organization. Again, take it, leave it, right? Change it to whatever you need it to be. Um, Appendix C really talks about inventory management. So we all love to think that we're going to implement one or two of these and it's going to be easy to manage. Absolutely not, right? Ed's already talked about, right, how many updates he's dealing with now. If you do not have an appropriate inventory management process and you know what you have, right, you are starting off on the wrong foot. And so Appendix C really talks about how do we discover AI that's already in our organizations, and then how do we go ahead and continue adding to our inventory to keep track of what we're implementing. D talks about roles and responsibilities. We all love a great RACI matrix. E and F are all your contract terms, whether it be in your commercial contracts or whether it be in your BAAs. G is all of the questions for your GRC. Again, pages and pages of questions. Go ahead and use the ones that are useful to you, again, based on the risk of whatever tool that you're implementing. My favorite is H, which is the training one. And I will tell you, this is not just a checklist, right? We love to put together checklists on things you need to learn. There is literally an entire curriculum in this document for you. So if your organization has a very strong education department that wants to take on AI training, you hand them this curriculum and they can just run with it. We've tried to make this incredibly easy for you guys so that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. All of us should be moving the bar forward, and this is one way that we can do that for you guys. I talks a lot about verification, validation, and quality assurance. So how do we do patches? How do we make sure that stuff, when it changes, is again safe and effective before it gets released again? And then, of course, right, all of the other foundational guidance that's out there is in J. NIST has some excellent, excellent work if you are not familiar, right, with the NIST work. Obviously, FDA has guidance out there and the other HSCC work that's out there. So if you do not want to read the 109 pages back to back to back, right, and the steps that we've gone through today are ones that your organization already implements, I'm going to tell you the appendices are just quick takeaways that you can just start implementing, right, without going through a very detailed read of the document. All right. So we've been talking a lot about what you can do. Let's talk a little bit about what your vendors aren't doing, right? And where you kind of need to focus. So vendors today, right, right, wrong, or indifferent, are in it to make money, right? They want to make their shareholders happy. They want to make their stakeholders happy. So they need to go ahead and sell product. So what they're not necessarily doing though is they're not really thinking about how to support their product throughout the entire life cycle. And that's really why one of the reasons why we took a life cycle approach, right, to this AI. We want them to go ahead and be able to provide us model cards, right? Documentation, right? Information that goes in an AI bomb, stuff like that. And they don't do a great job of that today. If they work in certain different subsectors, they're better at it than others because some subsectors do have really, really defined requirements. But a lot of vendors are not great at this, right? They're great at selling me something and they're not great at supporting it after the sale. So you really want to focus on ensuring that you're going to get what you need for the entire life of your product. They're also not great. They're not great in contract language, right? They want to move risk, right, to you as the healthcare organization, right? They don't want to take on the risk of their AI, right? They want you from a legal liability perspective to own all that risk. You do not own all that risk, right? And this is where you need to partner with your legal teams, partner with your compliance teams, and really have a strong contract to go ahead and move that liability to where it actually belongs. I have run into vendors who refuse to sign business associate agreements. I cannot believe, however long HIPAA has been with us, that we still have people that refuse to sign BAAs. You should not be doing business with organizations that refuse to sign BAAs, especially if you are giving them, right, your PHI and your PII, right? End of story. There's a lot of struggle around changes in the model and what kind of notification you get in changes in the model, right? Not a lot of documentation, all kinds of stuff. Fundamentally, right, this is really a document that helps you bridge all of these gaps to hold our vendors accountable from a baseline expectation kind of level, right? All of our vendors should be providing all of this to us on a regular, reoccurring basis. And so the more of us that adopt this, right, the more we're setting the foundation for what our vendors need to be providing to the entire sector. All right, so how do we do this, right? We have a life cycle type of process, but depending on where your organization is, maybe you're not ready to adopt an entire life cycle process. What I'm going to say is if you are nascent in the AI space and your organization really just needs to get started on how to go ahead and wrap their arms around AI, the number one thing you need to look at is governance, right? You need to figure out a body that's really going to formalize accountability, approval processes. How do you think about risk? Because every organization has a different risk tolerance. Do not implement processes and steps, right, until you have a really foundational governance, right? We do provide, right, a basic governance policy, but this is really foundational from your organizational perspective, right? The understanding of exactly what your organization's comfortable with implementing is foundational to how you're going to approach every step that we have in this guide. Once you have great governance, and some organizations are well on their way with great governance, you need to understand what you have, right? AI has been in our environment for a while. There are organizations and companies that have now been injecting AI into stuff we already have in our environment. You need an inventory. You need to do a current state assessment of exactly what you have. And that current state really needs to cover, right, what is in today, right, wrong, or indifferent, how it got implemented, what risk posture you're at, right? It may not be where you want to be, but you have to have a really great baseline of exactly what you have so that you can go from where you are to where you want to be. And then, of course, this is then when you start scaling your controls, right? Where are you supposed to be? How do you get there, right? If you are a larger organization, do you risk stratify your stuff, right? If you're a mid-size organization, right? What do you tackle first, right? Or if you're a small organization, right? What baseline requirements are you going to start recommending and implementing, right, across your entire ecosystem? After you've done, right, all of your control scaling, you can then start implementing and integrating all of these AI activities, right? We can enhance all of our contract templates, right? We can get really specific about asking GRC questions. We can really get specific about putting roles and responsibilities where they belong, holding our vendors accountable, that kind of stuff. Do not try starting to do that until you have all of your house in order, is really what I'm going to tell you. But again, the tools that we have here will help you jumpstart your programs, will help you, right, leaps and bounds without having to start at zero, right? None of us should be starting at zero. We should all be leveraging the tools that we have Right? I will say, and I continue to say, cybersecurity is one of those things we don't compete on, right? I may compete with other organizations for patients. We do not compete in cybersecurity. We will share these tools and resources so that we can all make our entire ecosystem a much safer place.
All right. So that was a lot to unpack. We have a couple of resources also that we've identified in the presentation. It's at the back of this presentation. We'll send it out for reference. Yesterday, we had the HSI ANSI discussion around that governance standard. That's an ANSI standard. We also, in the HSCC, have a sister document coming out soon, Sam, right, that you've helped out on, the AI
Yes, yes.
governance
So there is
document.
an AI governance document that
Hmm,
hopefully will be out in about a month,
that's right.
that will deep dive into AI governance because a lot of us need a lot of help setting up our governance, specifically in the cyber world.
And those documents have been written in a way that you can use both of them. So together. So we highly recommend you take a look at the AI governance doc when it comes out. All right. So as we think about some of the questions that came in prior to the webinar, I grabbed a few and jotted them down here, and we also have some coming in through the chat feature. But have you seen folks starting to use the guide? I know it's out, it's been out a week, but have you seen people starting to actually implement it? I know we had an all hands meeting recently as well. Was there a lot of talk about folks actually taking it and starting to implement it in their organization?
Yeah, there was a lot of interest in it, and I will tell you, our AI group in HSCC is relatively large, right? There's 5 or 6 AI documents that are in process right now
Hmm.
being written. Our little subgroup, right, has already started implementing it. We got a little first look kind of at it, and a lot of us have started implementing pieces and parts of it, right, depending on where we are in their journey. I think the most excited I've seen people is with the contract terms one, because we all struggle around contract terms. And then the training, right? A lot of organizations fall down when it comes to training. I will tell you, security folks, anytime I get this in front of a security person, absolutely wants every GRC question I have under the sun, right? And so obviously they're not going to ask all 100 and whatever it is of them, but
Right.
they don't even know what to ask at this point. And so just
Hmm.
to have a document to say, okay, well, I'm going to read through this and I'm going to understand exactly what I can ask to curate, right, for whatever's sitting in front of me is just helpful to them. So I haven't seen, right, it's only been out a little while. I haven't seen anybody use it from start to finish, but I will tell you, right, taking pieces and parts, especially out of the appendices, is really something people are gravitating towards because it meets them where they are in their programs.
Now you have a lot of experience procuring solutions from vendors. What pushback have you seen, and what advice would you give to folks that are actually in the middle of this?
Yeah, so vendors are very interesting, and it really depends on where your vendor's coming from, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So if your vendor is a medical device vendor per se, right, and they've been doing AI for quite a while, they don't necessarily want to do a lot of transparency with the model in and of itself because that AI is usually something that they've developed, right? And so that's proprietary to them. And so you have very interesting conversations during contracting when you want transparency, right, related to the model, and that's proprietary. And so you have to understand exactly why it's proprietary, right? If they're not using off-the-shelf type models and they're building their own models, you might have to have different conversations about what transparency means to you and what you actually want to get out of transparency, as opposed to getting right the actual transparency that you want. Now, if you're not in a regulated space, right? Let's say you're just a typical IT vendor, right? Transparency might be relatively easy, but maybe they don't have a lot of understanding of liability, right, when you're trying to move liability back to them so that, right, if something untoward happens and, I don't know, you've got bias or you've got, something that happens from a drift perspective, let's say, they need to have a stake, right, in what liability looks like. There is a ton of pushback, right, from legal teams around liability on the IT side. And so having those really, really difficult conversations to understand what you're getting yourself into is very, very important. And again, as IT people, as cyber people, those are not necessarily just your jobs. You need to really bring your group, really bring your legal teams, really bring your compliance teams to the table because that decision is not necessarily yours to make.
Hmm. Excellent. I'm going to skip around. I'm going to go to the resources and further reading slide because the question around how can we use this with other HSCC guides, I think is a good one. And there's a lot of material out there that the Health Sector Coordinating Council provides already. Not to mention there's a glossary that we've published. The same day we published the Third-Party AI Risk and Supply Chain Transparency Guide. And we talked about the ANSI 2800 2025 standard, but there's the AI RMF framework. We have the supply chain risk guide, HICSCRIM, and a couple of other resources to look at. As you think about your journey and you think about the journey of your peers, um, how do you think about these other guides and how to sort of integrate them into your overall program?
Yeah, it's about layering is really the way I've been telling people, right?
Mm,
So every organization is at a different place. And I understand there are many different kinds of organizations out there, right? I'm in a mid-size organization, right, that has some resources, but not, right, huge, right, D1 research level type, resources. I have two very rural hospitals, right, that struggle with very rural hospital type issues. And so I
hmm
completely understand, right, when we look at these guides, basic stuff like the very initial, right, supply chain HICSCRIM guidance is something that, right, when we acquired, right, these very small rural hospitals, they may not have even implemented to our level. And so
hmm
understanding and meeting hospitals where they are and having them continue to layer this guidance on, right? So that we can continue to improve, right, their posture and where they are. We do not need to go from 1 to 100 instantaneously. Every hospital does not need to look exactly the same on how they approach these issues because every hospital doesn't have the same resources. It doesn't have the same risk tolerance, right? It doesn't have the same even slate of technology that they're implementing. And so I really like to take these guidances and say, okay, well, where are you as an organization, right? And what would help you the most to get you to the next level, right? And then the next level, and then the next level. You do not have to be, right? Everyone does not have to be the huge hospitals of the world, right? With huge research organizations, right? And tons of resources, because not all of us are going to be able to sustain that kind of level, right, of effort and work it takes to get there. And frankly, not all of the tools we're implementing require that level of work either, right?
Right.
And that's why HSCC really recommends for a lot of its guidance a risk-based approach to a lot of things, right? Not everything is a nail, not everything is a hammer. We do not need to treat everything the exact same way. And so I really think a lot of the guidance that we've put out, and truthfully, a lot of guidance ANSI and NIST has put out, really can be applied to wherever any organization is to just take steps to move forward, right? We're not going light years ahead in any of this.
Right. Excellent advice. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to go to the chat feature here and I'm going to pull up some questions here. Wow, okay. Let's see. I already run a TPRM program. My team is stretched. Make the case for why AI needs its own overlay. Good question.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to say if you need to ask this question, we need to think about risk in a very different way, right? In my mind, AI risk is not the same as your
Correct.
regular risk, right, that you're looking at from an organizational perspective, right? The risks that AI bring into your organization are different than the normal types of risks that you see from an everyday basis and every tool that you bring in that doesn't have AI in it, right? A lot of us didn't even understand when we started learning about AI, all of the risks that are out there, right? We have to learn about what injection prompts can do. We have to learn about what bias is. And until you understand what those risks are and what the implications of them can be, I don't think any of us understand why we need to go ahead and look at AI in a different way. And so I will just say AI is a completely different beast, and the risks that we're looking at are so totally different than what we have. It absolutely needs to be another layer on top of what you're absolutely doing. And I completely get it, right? Organizations are stretched to the limit. And I'll go back to a risk-based methodology, right? You do not need to do everything for everything that crosses your desk. Find the happy medium, right? Risk your stuff out so that you can look at exactly what is high risk in your organization and focus on those things that are going to make the biggest difference.
Right, right. Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And whether it's an overlay or whether it's just deeply integrated, you have to do something different. You have to look at it differently. It is different. And if you don't, your successor will. Right? All
Well, and
right.
I'm going to say, right, AI, there are AI tools that are coming out that may help you. And I know a lot of us
Yes, absolutely.
are hesitant to look at new AI tools and to help take some workload off of our staff using, right, all kinds of agentic AI, but it's coming. And I want to say you can't hide from it anymore.
No, we're about at time, but I want to ask this last question. Clinicians are procuring AI tools outside formal IT channels. No way.
Never happens. Never happens.
How do I get visibility into shadow AI procurement?
So this is all about partnering, right? So
Hmm.
your organization has hidden processes just like there's hidden shadow IT, right? You need to understand what those processes are, and you need to figure out a way to inject yourself into those processes, especially around AI. And from a governance perspective, right? If your governance group is set up appropriately and can identify those shadow processes, they can help you drag your injects into that process. This is not something you need to be doing alone. You really need to be relying on your governance teams to help you get your arms around all the AI that's coming into your organization, whether it be right through the window, through the attic, right through the back
Right.
door. This is where governance
Hmm.
truly lives.
Right. Great point. All right. Well, we're at time. Thank you so much. This is terrific. It was a pleasure really working with you on this guide and bringing it to life. And there were so many people that were involved in that process. I mean, we were the co-leads, but there were a lot of people doing all the work.
Yes, we had a
And
great team. We had a great team, and
yeah,
thank you to all of them for all the work that
yeah.
we did.
Yeah, and at the in the guide itself, there's a acknowledgments page. So take a look at that for acknowledging all of the folks that participated in this document.
Wonderful. And thank you, Ed, for putting up this webinar.
Oh,
We do want to get the guide out. So if you
yeah,
guys have any questions, I know my contact information's out there, Ed's is out there. We're always happy to take questions after the fact.
that's right. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.